I want you for a moment to pretend that you're Canadian and imagine that you work at BHVR. A few months ago, someone tells you that there is a new concerning trend among new players. Someone has looked at the statistics and they realize that a lot of new players are loading into their matches without equipping any perks. Now, perks are a very important part of Dead by Daylight. Every character comes with some perks and there's a bunch that you can unlock and they help you play better and give you more information or some status effects or some help here and there. So it's quite important that new players learn how to use them. And if they're not really using them, that is a bit of a problem. Ask yourself, how would you solve this issue? I'm going to tell you how BHVR solved this issue, but before that, why don't you and I brainstorm together, you can follow at home if you want, what things we could do to help new players understand the whole system. Well, the first thing that we should start to begin solving this problem, and it's the most obvious one that I'm sure everyone at home is already thinking about, is to revamp the in-game tutorial. The in-game tutorial for both Killer and Survivor does not at any point really mention perks or explain really how to use them in any depth whatsoever. Even if you play the bot match as a Survivor or a Killer, you don't have any perks in this little game mode, so this really does not prepare you at all to use even the most basic perks in the game. So a little change here or some additions could be very, very welcome. Another one that would be obviously very welcome would be some kind of pop-up that explains how the loadout screen works, where you can equip what the effects are. Something like this as a welcome screen would be really, really welcome. Maybe make the whole thing a little bit less overwhelming. I've also been an advocate for a long time of reworking beginner perks. Obviously, the basic survivors come with perks that are relatively easy to use, but there's also a lot of common perks that every survivor has access to that are really complicated to use or that have very weird effects that don't really work on their own or require other perks. So I would be a big fan of reworking many of these perks to make them more beginner friendly so that beginners very quickly learn the fact that using these perks is good and they should use more in the future. I also think it would be a good idea if every survivor started with the perk that is most useful for beginners. Unfortunately, some of the survivors that we have right now, they may be like the first perk that you'll unlock with them or that you might have in your blood web is not extremely good on its own, or it's not good for beginners, or only works with other perks that you probably don't even have. So that would be a positive change as well. That hasn't happened quite yet. Instead of doing these things, what BHVR did was a lot simpler. They simply made it so that every character begins with one perk automatically equipped and an item as well. To give them a bit of credit, they also made a new quest system where you are encouraged to play certain killers with certain perks. Like it tells you to play maybe Trapper with Brutal Strength so that you experiment with that. I don't really know if this helps. If survivors were not finding and killers were not finding the perk loadout and they were not equipping perk, I don't think they're going to find the quest system either. But to their credit, this is a good change and it's meant to help beginners, so that's great. And if you would look at this from a numbers perspective, this is incredibly effective, This completely fixes the problem. From a percentage of, let's say, 25% of new players not using perks, we now have 0 players not using perks because they are all automatically equipped, right? So if we just look at the numbers, this solution was incredibly quick, incredibly fast, and it completely changed the statistic back to an acceptable number. And obviously, because it was so quick and so fast, it probably allowed the developers to move on to other more pressing issues. So that was probably also a good thing for them. However, let's look at the underlying issues of why this problem was there in the first place. Survivors do not have a good tutorial. Killers do not have a good tutorial. Many of the beginner perks are really awful. Even if you load up into a game right now with a new character and you have a perk automatically equipped, sometimes this perk is not good for you. I played in the PTB recently, and when I played Ace, it automatically equipped me with the perk open-handed, which on its own does absolutely nothing. It does nothing on its own. How is this helping beginners? So we took a fast approach that seemingly fixed the problem. And if we just look at the statistics, it does fix the problem completely, but it did not address the underlying issues. And because we didn't fix those underlying issues, they will continue to be a problem in the future. Now, why am I talking about this story in a video that is ostensibly about the 9.3.0 PTB? The reason I am talking about this little side story is because this PTB, these patch notes were very disappointing to me as a long-time enjoyer of this game, as a long-time enthusiast of this game, for the very same reason. What I'm about to talk about in the next PTB has the same MO, the same method that we just saw. We are going to see fixes that will probably change the numbers enough to be acceptable, but that come at the cost of ignoring underlying issues, and that come at the cost of creating new problems somewhere else. So yeah. In this PTB, the developers were basically trying to address several core issues of the game. They explain in a dev stream that one of the major reasons why survivors especially were quitting the game and uninstalling the game was because they didn't want to deal with excessive tunneling, camping, slugging, parts of the gameplay that are not super fun or super engaging. So they've come with some sweeping changes, a little bit different from the previous PTB, we'll mention that later, and they've tried to soften this and make the gameplay a bit more friendly. Let's talk about the issues that they bring up, how we could fix them, but what behavior ended up doing instead. We're going to begin with excessive slugging. Slugging is defined as a killer leaving a survivor on the ground, not just for a second, but for extended periods of time, and sometimes even doing it to multiple survivors. So for a killer, sometimes it's very easy to leave a survivor on the ground, leave a survivor on the ground, leave a survivor on the ground, and with everyone being basically unable to move and do anything meaningful, it can be really, really boring. And this is something that the developers are looking into changing. So this is the issue. What could we do to slowly ameliorate this situation? Here are some of my ideas that I'm sure you would come up with as well. You can tell me in the comments, by the way, if you have others. The first one, and this one is really, really simple. Why don't we look a little bit harder into removing certain unhookable spots? There's not too many left. There's really not that many left, but I can think of at least one place in one map where if a survivor goes down there, I find it impossible to find a hook. Many times as a killer, it's not about whether you want to hook or not. You just do not have the possibility. The fact that sabotaging was buffed recently as well could also influence this. So maybe considering the few maps here and there where hooking becomes really, really difficult could help with the slugging situation a little bit. We're going to start with simple things like this. Next one, why has blindness as a status effect not been reworked? In many of my matches as a killer, where I use perks like Third Seal or add-ons that apply blindness, I realized that survivors are not picking each other up from the ground or even from the hook sometimes because they simply don't see each other. It's not that I'm making them not pick each other up. It's not that I'm defending the hook and camping. They simply don't see each other. For some insane reason, blindness status effect still affects survivor auras. Now, blindness does have some exceptions as well. If a survivor is blind because of an add-on or a perk, they still see the aura of killer props. So for example, if you're playing against the Plague, you can still see the fountains. If you're playing against the Pig, you can still see the auras of the boxes that you have to search. If you didn't see these auras, that would be really, really unfair. But for some reason, the developers find it fair that you don't see the auras of your teammates. If you are playing solo or in a small group and you don't know what everyone else is doing and you're on the hook and you're blind, you don't know where your teammates are. When you get a hook, you don't know where to go to rescue them. If someone is on the ground, you don't see their aura and you can't go help them. And a lot of these situations are not fair, and this playstyle very much discriminates on who is in a group and can call each other out on Discord, like, hey, I'm in chat, please come pick me up, and who is not on a group and doesn't have information. And many times this blindness status effect just hurts survivors. It should be reworked so that if someone is on the ground or someone is on the hook, that aura should always be visible to you to avoid situations where survivors kind of slug themselves accidentally. That, I think, would be a really easy change, and I'm very surprised they haven't done it yet. Another one that drives me really, really insane is just how inconsistent healing survivors of the ground is. I'm sure that when I say this, this will probably remind you of many situations that you've been through before as a survivor, but sometimes you go and try to pick up a survivor off the ground and many things prevent you from doing it. For some reason, perks like Mangled, perks like Sloppy Butcher, which apply Mangled, work on survivors off the ground and you will heal them slower, which seems a bit unnecessary. Skill checks are also part of healing survivors off the ground, and they can really get under your skin. If two survivors go to another survivor that is on the ground and try to heal them really quickly, this normally only takes 8 seconds, maybe 4 seconds if the person was already half recovered. But if for whatever reason that survivor presses shift or accidentally moves 1 pixel and the interruption happens and you miss a skill check during that, you will now not be able to heal that survivor for another 2 or 3 seconds. the skill checks on the ground are incredibly, incredibly unforgiving. How many times have you tried to heal a survivor? Really quickly, the killer maybe comes by, you let go for a second, you miss a skill check because that happens, and bam, now you, even though the survivor is like 90%, you cannot pick them up. I think healing survivors off the ground should be a bit more forgiving. There should be more of a period of grace if people move only a little bit, not to interrupt it. That I think would help beginners a lot. And I think it should not be affected by other perks that are meant to affect anti-healing. Now, there can be some perks specifically for picking up or healing people off the hook, that's fine, but it should not be affected by that. They could also just increase the speed at which you pick up other people off the ground naturally and maybe not affected by almost any perk at all. I think they should really, really consider doing that, because right now, a lot of situations will end up with you not being able to hook someone just because of luck or other things that really shouldn't be in the way. I feel really, really strongly about this. Another thing, as I mentioned, they could just make the survivor healing other people faster, and they could also make the killer picking up faster. It is a little bit difficult to talk about this, but basically what you need to know if you haven't played DBD for many years is that killers used to do everything much, much slower back in the day. Picking up a survivor was very slow, vaulting a window took 5 years, hooking a survivor was incredibly slow, breaking a pallet or a generator was very, very slow, and for the most part, many of these things have been sped up along the years and have resulted in a game that feels smoother. For some reason, killers are still 92% movement speed while they carry, and for some reason, killers still are very, very slow when they hook. They could just make these things a little bit faster to encourage killer to get things going and pressure other things. Many times I down a survivor, and even though I have time to down that survivor, I look at the HUD, I look around myself, and I realize I've downed the survivor, but I don't have the time to pick them up. I don't have the time to go to a hook. I don't have the time to go through these two animations, and it's too much of a time sink. Making all of these actions a tiny bit faster, killers could move at 96% speed, killers could pick up a fraction of a second quicker, killers could by default hook a little bit sooner. They could do all of these things, and that would be really, really wonderful. I think the reason they will not do this, however, is because they've already designed 3 or 4 perks that make you do this faster, and then they would need to redesign these perks, and they probably don't want to do that, which is a little bit disappointing. This one is also really, really important and not extremely obvious. Increase power availability across all killers when you are hooking a survivor. It is really punishing to hook a survivor sometimes. If you hook a survivor, as many killers, you cannot use your power immediately. Some killers, their power is disabled around a hook when you put a survivor on it, even if the survivor is dying. So if you're playing twins, for example, and you hook a survivor for the 3rd time, even though the survivor is literally dying on the hook and he's out of the game, you cannot use Victor for a few seconds. This is awful. I also think that a lot of killers should have their powers completely refilled when hooking a survivor. Deathslinger could automatically reload. Wesker could automatically have his dashes refilled, which they are so slow that sometimes this doesn't happen. Other killers that have a reload or have a cooldown could have their cooldowns reset when hooking a survivor, just to encourage them to get that hook so that they waste even less time. Again, we're trying to make the whole process of hooking a little bit less of a time sink for killer. Make it less attractive to leave people on the ground, right? Make it more attractive and more efficient to hook people. Little changes like this would go a long, long way. Next up, this is more of a small consideration, but we probably should start thinking about what are we going to do about the whole dying under a pallet or dying in the open. I think when the developers balance the game, they need to consider whether or not they are introducing something new that makes hooking survivors unattractive. When you have a survivor on the ground and you just sit on top of them, there's very little survivors can do. But when you pick up that survivor, survivors suddenly can use a flashlight save, can use a flashbang, can use a pallet rescue, and some of these things at some level become a little bit broken, especially when we had background player being 200% movement speed. They really should, going forward, make sure that survivors should have some option of counterplay, obviously, and should have some interesting things and altruistic things that they can do, but they really should consider not making new perks and not making new mechanics that allow survivors to save each other so consistently that a killer would have to slug out of necessity. I personally think, and this is a bit of a hot take, that after being rescued one time, and getting flashy save one time, the killer should have some kind of enraged status effect that prevents it for at least one more pickup, so that it is impossible for a survivor to repeatedly die under a pallet, and as long as there's one person nearby with sprint burst, you cannot do anything about it as a killer if they are good at timing it, which many survivors can be. So I personally would introduce something like that. But even if they don't, just consider this. And another thing that they should really consider is the power of self-unhooks. There are right now basically 3 ways to unhook yourself as a survivor. 3 ways to unhook yourself as a survivor with, good chances to actually succeed. One is Deliverance, which I think is a problem. We'll talk about why. The other one is Wicked, which will become a problem. We'll talk about why. And the other one are luck builds. With luck builds, hooking a survivor allows them to unhook themselves so consistently that I think it's honestly not a good idea for the killer to even hook. So I would definitely look at these builds that allow you to unhook yourself and make sure that they have a lot more risk compared to their reward, or that they are a bit less effective, or that they are rewarding to something else. You should never, as a killer, be in a situation where hooking a survivor is objectively the bad play. But anyway, none of these things are being done. None of these things, as far as I know, are being considered. Let's have a look at what BHVR did instead. The way BHVR has handled this is a lot simpler and a lot quicker. They now give you a resolve bar when you're on the ground, down by the killer, not by yourself. And over 2 minutes, you can pick yourself up. And if there are more people down, it is faster. Also, if you've been on the ground for a longer period of time, you start crawling a little bit quicker. Honestly, I don't hate this system. I think this system is okay. For the most part, if you down a survivor one time, it's not a big deal. If you down many survivors many times and you try to end the game that way, it allows them to bounce back. It is a buff to survivor, and it does create maybe a few ugly situations in the end game where the better play for a survivor team is to just leave their teammate. If you're in the end game, the exit gates are open or about to be open, and someone across the map goes down and the killer's trying to get someone else, your best play is no longer to go pick them up. Your best play is just to 99 the gate and hide, or even open the gate and just hide, wait it out until your teammate can pick themselves back up, and then crawl to the gate or whatever, right? So I do fear for what ugly and boring situations this system could create, but it's not a horrible system. They did, however, miss out on the opportunity to do all of the things that we listed above that would just make the game a little bit more pleasant, even if the killer wasn't slugging too much, right? So yeah, a bit of a missed opportunity, but the way they handled slugging in this PTB is not the absolute worst. I think it's somewhat acceptable. I do not feel that optimistic about the new problem that we're going to talk about. Another issue that the developers brought up in their dev stream is excessive camping. Now, you already know that survivors now can be on the hook for 70 seconds longer, which apparently that's a good thing because survivors are now unhooking later. So that's already something that's in the game and survivors are taking advantage of. And there's also an anti-camp feature or an anti-face camp feature, where if the killer is very, very close, then a survivor can unhook themselves, provided that it's not the endgame, right? But this is still something that they are willing to look into again and make it even better to prevent face camping situations. What could we suggest to prevent camping, face camping, or proxy camping? Here are some ideas. The first one is to explain to people on both sides why camping can and cannot work, when you should do this and when you should do that. The tutorials do not really teach you anything about the macro gameplay. They might teach you how to drop a pallet, how to vault a window, how to unhook a survivor, but they never tell you when you should drop a pallet, when you should go for the rescue, what should you do if the killer is on the hook. And this is a bit of a failure from the game. It is something that we content creators can teach you and that tutorials can explain on the internet and that experience will eventually show you how to deal with. But yeah, teaching new players how to deal with this and teaching the killer, hey, staying near the hook isn't always a good idea, and providing better examples and better tutorials would be really, really good for the average new player. I also think that it is almost criminal that players that are not in a full survivor fence do not have any basic information about their other teammates. One of the reasons why camping or proxy camping is effective is because the lack of information. I am on a generator, right? And I'm working on a generator. It's not about to be finished, but I obviously want to stay there. And I notice that no one has gone for the rescue. I look at the HUD and my other two teammates, they're not doing anything. So I expect them to go for the rescue. So I stay on the generator, but it's now getting closer and closer to the point where my hook teammate is about to die or go to the next stage. So I let go of my generator and I start going there. And then I realized that the other two guys were doing the exact same thing, and they also start going there. And now suddenly the killer is camping. None of us are doing any generators. The killer is maybe one of those killers that can camp very effectively, and that person dies or hits stage 2 and no gens are being done. This doesn't happen when you're playing in a group. This doesn't happen if you have kindred and you see each other's aura. But if you're playing solo or a partial survivor friends, this can happen to you so frequently, and it is very frustrating. Giving the survivors a little bit of basic information about what each of them is doing during the time when someone is hooked is really, really important in my opinion, and I'm very baffled that they haven't considered doing this. This would make camping so much less of an issue. At this point, if the killer is camping, you all know what the killer is doing. You all know what each other is doing. Because you see the resolve bar. We'll talk about that later. And at that point, you can just punish camping by simply staying on gens and one person or maybe two people going in last minute. So a little bit more information would be very welcome. And I'm very surprised they didn't explore this possibility before more drastic changes. And this too honestly have to come together. This is again a bit of a hot take. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. I personally don't think there should be any killer in the game that can have a 100% chance to deny an unhook. It's true that if you're playing Myers and you have a timer, yeah, you can camp the hook for a bit. And it's true that if you have a perk like Haunted, you can stay on the hook for a little bit. Those are timed and they don't last forever. But a killer like Cannibal, being able to just be on the hook and never, ever allowing an unhook, I think is a problem. I personally really would advocate for insta-down killers to be changed. They retain all of their powers. Maybe they could even be buffed in other ways. But if they hit you while you're unhooking someone, that hook doesn't insta-down you. It interrupts you, and then you have to unhook again, and maybe it's a trade, and it's kind of like a normal killer attacking you, but no insta-down. I personally find it really boring, either in endgame or even during the game, when a killer just camps the top of the basement with a chainsaw, and there is no counterplay for you to do anything there. If we did nerf these killers to not allow this situation to happen, we could also look at a very problematic thing that happens in the game right now, which is what happens when you hook a survivor between your 3 generators. If the last 3 generators are the only ones that are left, and they are making a little triangle, and you hook a survivor in the middle, in all Dead by Daylight, that used to be a great strategy. That was a great play. That was amazing. Now you can defend all of the generators, and the survivors will have to sweat really hard to get their teammate out of the hook. But if you do that in the current Dead by Daylight, and let alone the next iteration, you're going to be the one suffering, because you cannot stay by the gens. The hook lasts so long that if you stay by the hook and by the gens, the survivor will unhook themselves. And if you go away, the other survivors, they might rescue, or they might not even rescue. They might just go and do the gens next to the person on the hook. And there's nothing you can do but return and then give anti-camp. So I don't think it's fair to punish a killer that has a hook between their gens. I think that if no killer was able to immediately deny every unhook, then this would be fair game. So I would make these 2 changes happen together. I personally would not consider it camping if a hook is between 3 gens like this, personally. Of course, this is not what was being done. Instead, what we had is we have reworked the camping resolve system. The camping resolve system occurs when you're on the hook and the killer stays near you for extended periods of time. The first thing that they did, which I 100% agree with, is that now this system is visible to your teammates. So if you're about to unhook yourself because the killer is so close to you, your teammates see it on the HUD and then they know not to come and help you. That's awesome. That's amazing. That I don't think they should have changed. But they also revamped the way the system works. Now, instead of up to 60 meters, it covers up to 20 meters. And the longer the killer stays within this, the faster it builds up. I have tested this, and honestly, proxy camping with this is incredibly punishing. If you are in a 3-gen, you can be nowhere near. You really need to just go for someone else and hope that you have perks and power utilities to somehow get away with it. It is very punishing. And again, I think it misses the opportunity to give more information to solo players and the other things that we discussed earlier. But now let's talk about the real thing that this PTB honestly gets so wrong, and it is excessive tunneling. Tunneling is defined as when a killer goes for a survivor when they are unhooked and maybe even does this repeatedly and tries to get them out of the game. It's kind of like tunnel vision-y, right? So you hook Dwight and then maybe you kick a gen or whatever, but then you go for Dwight again. And then when Dwight gets unhooked, you go for him again, maybe ignore everyone else that you could possibly be chasing, right? You have options, but you don't care. You just go for Dwight, hook Dwight 3 times, he's out of the game. Now, first, let's talk about what the developers intended to do with the system in the previous 9.20.0 PTB. So what they wanted to do initially is if you killed a survivor with less than 6 hook stages total, you would have a massive punishment as a killer. Now the generators would suddenly be a lot harder to keep up with, right? Every time you hook the survivor, however, to compensate for this, you would get auto-reading on some of the survivors far away. You would get a little bit of haste, depending on the killer, it was more or less. And you would also damage the next generator that you kicked with way more damage. Your kick would do a big chunk of damage to it. But survivors also had more protections upon a hook. On top of a bunch of things that they are still going to keep, they also had no collision as well. This is completely out of the window. They realized that this was maybe too intrusive. It was dealing with the game too much. They also changed a lot of regression perks to make up for it. They have gone back on this. Okay, so this is something that we are not going to be working with. Let's just keep it in mind. Now, personally, I think that the system that prevented killers from killing someone with less than 6 hooks was good. It just needed to be brought back. It just needed to be brought down to 5 or 4. I made a video talking about a system that would replace that could make the most egregious forms of tunneling a bit less of an issue. I'm gonna link it in the card if you want to click on it. I don't want to talk about it, but yeah, that system could be recycled. But if we assume that that's out of the window, what else could we do? The first one, I think we should redefine tunneling. Some killers have certain power actions that should not be doable by a person that got unhooked. The most insane one that I can think of from the top of my head is pinhead. When you are a survivor, especially in this PTB, you can go straight for the box and solve it. And if the killer tries to interrupt you, they will deal with your anti-tunnel. You don't lose decisive strike, you don't lose endurance, you don't lose the speed boost, you don't lose anything by doing the box. And this is really punishing for the killer. By doing the box, you're helping the whole team do gens and do heals and do everything. It is an objective. It is part of the gameplay. And yet, if you do that, you don't lose it doesn't count as a conspicuous action. So I definitely would rework that, and any other case where interacting with the killer power is not necessarily just you, it's helping your team. So for example, grabbing an EMP possibly could count as conspicuous actions. I'm not so sure about that, but some of them, like the box, should definitely count. That's number one. That one's really, really simple. Number two, they could have experimented before throwing it away with the idea of giving killers a passive or automatic slowdown. What they did in the PTB previously is that they gave killers an active slowdown, where if you kicked a generator, you would do an extra, 20% of damage. And that was powerful, but more powerful on killers with high mobility. A killer like Blight could hook someone, go across the map, kick a gen, go right back, and zigzag around the map super quickly and apply that every single time. Killers that were a bit slower, like Huntress or Hack, they simply don't have the mobility to go across the map kicking generators. So if you gave killers some kind of slowdown or some kind of passive slowdown that happens when you hook a survivor for the first time, that would probably be more fair and more equitable and more universally useful to all killers. A simple one that you could do is this one. If you hook a survivor, that survivor has a speed debuff of whatever % on generators. That means that if you tunnel them, you're not really benefiting from them. But if you let them go and you go for someone else and you have opportunities to go for someone else, that survivor is less efficient on generators. That could be one. Or maybe a mini pain res where when you hook a survivor, all gens now take 5 seconds longer to complete, all remaining gens. Or they all lose 10% of their current progress. Or something like that. Something that does not necessarily discriminate as much. Obviously, everything's going to discriminate, but it doesn't discriminate as much between high mobility and low mobility killers. They could have experimented with something like that, but we're not going to see it. I can tell you all that. I also think this is a really, really important one. There are currently several survivor perks that punish a killer for not tunneling, that make tunneling the better strategy. I think the biggest example and the worst offender is Resurgence. Resurgence is a perk where if the killer leaves you alone for 3 seconds, you can heal yourself with a medkit or have someone heal you with a medkit or without a medkit, and you're healed to full almost immediately. It is so fast. It is so efficient. It really makes you as a killer lose so much time hooking a survivor only for them to bounce back into full health so quickly. But the worst part is that if the killer actually chases you and hits you, you completely lose it. If you are hit off hook, you will immediately go into endurance, and instead of being 70% heal, now you're 0% heal and you have to mend. So yeah, basically, if everyone is running endurance, as a killer, your best play is to just tunnel, even just a little bit, immediately of the hook. Perks like this should not exist. There shouldn't be perks that require the killer to tunnel or else deal with horrible consequences. It's okay to have Will Make It. It's okay to have a perk that allows survivors to heal each other off hook a little bit faster. And it's okay to have perks that punish the killer for tunneling. But there should not be perks this strong that only work as long as a killer isn't tunneling. And this is related, but not exactly the same. We should also rework survivor perks that discourage the killer from spreading hooks. Now, one of the healthiest things that a killer can do for the fun of the gameplay of everyone involved is to spread hooks. Hook survivor A, hook survivor B, hook survivor A, hook survivor C, hook survivor D. Go back and forth between all the survivors, build up pressure. Eventually, maybe they all escape, or maybe they all die, or maybe something in between happens and everyone is happy, right? No one feels unfortunately targeted repeatedly. That's the best way that it doesn't always go that way, but it's the best way the game should go, right? Unfortunately, there are a lot of perks on the survivor side that actively discourage the killer from doing this. If you hook survivor A and then B and then C and then D, you are going to eat very powerful effects from perks such as Deliverance. Deliverance, if you've ever thought about it, allows a survivor to unhook themselves, but only if they've safely rescued another survivor first. So basically, if you tunnel a survivor very, very aggressively, and I mean very aggressively, you will never have to deal with Deliverance on that survivor. And if you tunnel them even more aggressively and down them super, super quickly to the point where they don't even get a rescue, you won't even have to deal with Deliverance on anybody else later either. So basically, you get punished for not tunneling super, super hard with perks that have such strong effects. I think this perk should work in reverse. If a killer is tunneling, then Deliverance could activate. If a killer is being obsessively chasing one survivor, then other perks with strong effects activate to counter that. But you should not punish killers for spreading hooks, and at the moment, the game does have a few perks like this. This also happens on the killer side, by the way. I do think the killer side right now has a few perks that are really, really strong in the 3v1 and help you get there. Pain Res and Deadman Switch is a really, really good combo. Perks like is it Force? Yeah, perks like Force Hesitation allow you to down a survivor that's taking a protection hit and then go back to the person that you were tunneling. There are a few perks that could be reworked or could be changed to simply not enable these situations or to be disabled in a 3v1 scenario. For example, I think that Pain Resonance as a concept is a very healthy perk. If you hook a new survivor, you get a big slowdown. You hook a new survivor, big slowdown. And if you hook the same survivor, it doesn't work. Unfortunately, Pain Resonance is used by tunnelers a lot because what you will do is you'll tunnel one person, then Deadman Switch will block gens, then you're going to tunnel that person again, then Deadman Switch will block gens again, and then when you're in the 3v1, you will still have 3 Pain Resonances to fight for the last gen or 2 and still win the game. So I do think more perks should be disabled in the 3v1, more perks should encourage you to spread hooks, more perks like Make Your Choice, more perks like No Way Out, more perks like, for example, is it called None Are Free? Yeah, none are free from the ghoul. More perks that require you to hook multiple survivor, right? Buff those perks, make them more usable. Perks like, for example, Ravenous from the Krasu. These perks should be more consistent and more powerful. And perks that require you to, or enable you to hook the same survivor should be a little bit weaker across the board. What we have right now is kind of the opposite. Perks that require you to hook multiple survivors are super risky. Devourer is really risky. Ravenous is really risky. They can be found really quickly. They can be disabled really quickly. They get destroyed by perks like Vigil, which cut the insta-down time very dramatically. So an overall audit and rebalancing of perks with this philosophy in mind would be really, really good for the game as well. Another thing that is often not talked about is how many killer powers literally reward you for camping and then immediately tunneling. This is something that is, I'm talking about it here, but also applies to the previous tunneling to the previous camping issue. A lot of killer powers are really, really good when a survivor unhooks in front of you. So good that you would be really, really stupid not to use it. If you're playing Dracula, if you're playing Cannibal, if you're playing Pyramid Head, if you are playing, what else? Plague back in the day, I'm not sure she can do it anymore due to a bug. Many of these killers, a survivor unhooking in front of you is an opportunity to get to get 2 hits at once. Not only that, because the survivor that you hit has lost their endurance, it's now really, really tempting to go for them. And I think this is a problem. I personally think that a survivor that is unhooked for about 1 second or half a second until they can move should be immune to certain powers like this. That doesn't mean that you can hit them. You should be able to hit them with a basic attack or whatever, but some of these powers should not work. For example, as a Wesker, it's really, 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 really smart for you to wait until the survivor unhooks, if you can, and then slam them against the survivor that they unhooked. And now you might get it down, and that person you can tunnel immediately after if you want to. This should change. You as a killer should never be encouraged to stay by the hook and do this, in my opinion. You should be strong in other ways. You should be stronger in chase. You should have fewer pallets or fewer safety points. I'm not saying nerf killer to the ground, but do not make killer have one of their strongest moments be at around unhooks. I think that's a mistake. Rework basic perks to include some anti-tunnel options. I've talked about this so many times. We heard from the developers themselves that the major affected players by tunneling happen at higher MMR. Camping happens more at low MMR when people are less experienced and they don't know where to go. Maybe they don't know the map. Maybe they don't know the game so well. So it's normal that they want to defend their kill. But tunneling is the opposite. Tunneling happens more at high level MMR where players are more serious. At this point, survivors and killers both have access to a wide variety of perks, but they probably don't have all of them all the time. And I think it's honestly a massive, massive missed opportunity that none of the current basic perks help you with tunneling. If you want to not be tunneled, the only thing you can do is currently, I guess, buy Off the Record from Zarina, which is getting nerfed in this update, or spend $5 on the Halloween DLC to buy Laurie, or more dollars, depends if you buy the whole DLC. So you basically have to pay at least $5 to buy a perk called Decisive Strike to help you with tunneling. There is nothing else in the game that's free and effective and easy to use that is anywhere as good as Decisive Strike. This, in my opinion, is criminal. I would rework Decisive Strike to do anything else and then make the effects of Decisive Strike or something very similar into a basic perk. It could be This Is Not Happening, it could be Spine Chill, it could be one of those current perks that not a lot of people use, rework it into being an anti-tunnel perk, or make a new base perk if necessary. This is something they should have done so long ago. It is almost offensive that they haven't done it already. Still to this day, you have to pay $5 if you don't want to be tunneled. I also think that on top of more perks, there should be more mechanics to help survivors that are dead on hook. Right now, if I am playing survivor and I look at the HUD and I see that one of my teammates is dead on hook and no one else has been hooked, I am sweating. On the one hand, I want to help them, right? Because if they die, now we're in a 3v1. But on the other hand, I don't want to get in their way, and I know I need to do gens. So which one do I do? It's really hard to do it. In a situation like this, if you don't have really good information perks, or if you're not in a survivor friends, you often have a lose-lose situation where if you don't do gens, the team is going to die eventually. And if you go for the rescue, sometimes you don't know where they're being chased. You don't know whether they have a healing perk. You don't know anything, right? So knowing which perks my teammates would have would be amazing. Seeing the aura of someone that is dead on hook would be amazing. Giving a person dead on hook some natural buff that makes their aura visible to everyone or makes them get healed a little bit faster would be amazing. Make it so that being dead on hook has some sort of benefit for survivor. Not enough that you want to be dead on hook, but yes, enough to help you survive and help your teammates help you, which right now is very, 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 very difficult without very specific perks. So that I definitely would. I also think there should be more perks that reward survivors for sticking around and reward them for dying for the team. A constant thing that I hear in Dead by Daylight discussions is that many survivors feel cheated. They run the killer for a long time. Their teammates escape, but they get nothing. They get less blood points. They don't even get a thank you. Maybe they run the killer for a long time, but the last survivor just hides and gets the Hajj. I think there should be more perks and encouragement given to survivors that stick around to the end. If your teammates escape, but you died, if you stick around to the end, I don't know if it's possible if you leave, but that's a bit technical. You get some extra blood points. You get a little medal. You get a little something that acknowledges that, hey, you died, but in your death, your teammates could find the opportunity to get out, and that's partly thanks to you. Thank you. Well done. Here's some extra blood points. Here's some extra accolades. Here's some extra something. I know it's small, but something like that could help. There could also be more perks, especially aimed at beginners, that have effect upon death. If you have this perk, you get some effect, and upon dying, your teammates get a small boost to this. There is no perk in the game currently that has any effect upon your death, as far as I know. So having some perks that are like 1 or 2 perks aimed at beginners, where even if you die, you give some small buff to your teammates, not enough that you want to die for it, but yes, enough that it does something and makes you feel a little better, that could really help. There are a lot of players that play Survivor very casually. They know they're going to get tunneled. They know they're going to be targeted because they don't loop as efficiently as their teammates. And having a perk that activates on your death could also be a tiny bit of an encouragement that softens the blow a little bit. There are other games that go way further. When you die, you have the opportunity to traverse the map as a ghost, to place rewards for your teammates, or to pick up pallets, or to find a book that lets you revive someone else, right? Like, they don't need to go that crazy, but something like that could help, man. Even something small that lets you be involved in the game after you've died, even flying around as a spirit and just pointing out things, or something small like that could help, and so far as we know, has not been explored. I also think that another missed opportunity is endgame builds. Endgame builds right now are really, really meh for both sides. They're sometimes very hit or miss, or they're very unfair. I would honestly do a pass on endgame builds and encourage more endgame in general. Many times when it gets to endgame, it comes down to whether or not survivors feel like going for the unhook. If they don't feel like going for the unhook, and there's still many of them, they just open the gate, they leave. Killer cannot do very, very much. So it would be nice if a few more perks were geared towards extending the endgame. There's at least a couple for Killer right now and a few for Survivor. But I would also, I don't know, encourage the endgame a little bit more. Give Survivors more blood points and more effects for unhooking an endgame when they clearly don't have to. Things like that could be a little bit nice as well. And yeah, this is not related directly to tunneling, but it's also something that boggles my mind that hasn't been considered. One of the reasons that killers find themselves in the dire need of tunneling is because they look at the gen counter and they see 5 gens, 4 gens, 3 gens, 2 gens, 1 gen, and then they realize this isn't getting any better. Reducing the amount of perks and the impact of the perks that change the speed of generators, I think, is very important. I made a video some time ago. If you want to watch it, I'll link it up, where I discuss how generators could go really, really slow with some perks and really, really fast with some perks, and that this wide, crazy variability wasn't good for the game. It would be better if gens at their slowest were not super, super slow, and gens at their fastest were not too much faster. Right now, there are so many things in the game, and a few in particular, that make gens so unbelievably fast. I generally do not know how this game can be balanced if survivors are doing gens in 70 seconds with toolboxes. How do you balance this game around not tunneling if generators can be so fast? Toolboxes need to be looked at. Toolboxes add-ons need to be looked at. A few perks could be looked at to avoid some edge case scenarios as well. Not nearly as important or as impactful as toolboxes, but still, they could be looked at as well. I personally would change skill checks on gens to be a bit different. We probably all have seen videos and examples of a skill check build doing a gen in like 30 seconds. It's a little bit silly. I would personally normalize these things to be a little bit less wild in how different the fastest and the slowest gen can be. And also, it goes without saying, if tunneling is more of an issue at higher MMR, why don't we nerf S tier killers? No one at the lower MMR bracket is going to cry if Blight is a little bit weaker. And no one's going to cry if Nurse has a bit more countering. Nurse, for example, you used to be able to burn her with a flashlight, and this could actually help you to prevent her from tunneling a teammate. But now they took that away. And now you can't even do that. I think some of the high tier killers could have a bit more counterplay when it comes to taking hits or being able to help someone that is tunneling. One of the things that makes S tier killers S tier is that taking hits against them is almost impossible, and it's such a bad idea to be injured against most of them that you don't even want to try, because if it goes wrong, you're going to throw the game immediately. So yeah, nerf S tier killers or the higher tier killers, bring them down a little bit. It's probably about time, but at this point, I'm talking into the wind. The developers obviously haven't done any of that for this patch. I don't think they're going to do even half of these things long term. What they've done instead is honestly really, really baffling. So when a killer gets a unique hook, not always, but when they get a unique hook, someone that they haven't hooked immediately previously, they get the bloodlust effect for 15 seconds. And I have to say that this is only sometimes, okay? Only sometimes. If you hook the same survivor twice, you don't get this effect. If you have a killer that has to use a power immediately upon hooking a survivor, it goes away. There is a full list, actually, made by someone on Twitter. I'll post a little screenshot that explains when each killer loses bloodlust. For example, if you're playing Ghostface, which is not one of the strongest killers in the game, he loses bloodlust if he goes into stealth. So this advantage of moving a little bit faster for a while, it's not bad, but it's also so weird, and it also fails on a lot of killers. And it is nothing, and I mean nothing compared to what survivors are getting at this update. When survivors get unhooked, they have 30 seconds of endurance, 30 seconds of extra 10% haste, and 30 seconds of not making any sounds, not leaving any scratch marks, not leaving any blood, not doing any coughing, or similar sounds as well. Pretty much pure stealth, right? That is really, really good. They also keep their collision, unlike the previous iteration, so they can body block for someone as well if they dare to do so. This also goes away if they heal. That's a good thing because they have a lot of time to heal, but stays for 3 seconds after they get healed. And then on top of that, if the killer is close to them, they see the aura of the killer, which for the most part shouldn't be a big deal, but in some situations it could help them find a killer that's setting traps or something when maybe that killer doesn't want to be found, maybe in some indoor map or something like that. So they get a lot of stuff, and killer gets almost nothing. Again, once again, none of these changes are addressing the underlying issue of why killers feel the need to tunnel. Killers feel the need to tunnel because the best perks in the game encourage them to do so. Because the best perks on the other side punish them very severely if they don't do so. And also for the very obvious reason where if you kill one survivor, the other 3 survivors are much harder pressed to do gens, and it's much easier to pressure them, and gens just become slower. These changes, they might bring the numbers down a bit. Maybe behavior will be happy with this, but they are adding an extra layer of complication, an extra layer of like things that happen upon unhook that it's just not going to address any of these underlying issues, and it's going to make future changes probably a little bit more awkward. Yeah, but now it's time to talk about the other things that have happened with this patch. Obviously, when you make these many changes, for example, showing the aura of the killer to a person that's been unhooked, you now have to account for a lot of perks that used to do that. So a lot of perks, a lot of add-ons, a lot of other killers have been adjusted. And we're going to talk about the victims, the things that have been hurt in this PTB indirectly. The first one being Pinhead. Pinhead, who is not the strongest killer in the game, has had his add-on Original Pain reworked. This add-on used to make survivors put into the deep wound, which allowed them to maybe be tunneled a little bit earlier. They already nerfed it once, but they've reworked it, okay? Now this add-on allows you to see the aura of a survivor that has broken a chain of your possessed chain. There's only one problem. One tiny problem. There's already an add-on that does almost the exact same thing, and it's the exact same rarity as well. I'm gonna put you side to side, okay? 2 images, 2 videos of these 2 add-ons working, okay? And you tell me which one is which. Can you tell me which one's which? It's very difficult. They do almost the exact same thing. In fact, one of them is arguably a bit better than the other. It's basically, I think honestly they forgot. I honestly think they forgot. I don't know why they would make this add-on be an aura add-on when there's already one that does something so similar. My theory is that they forgot that there was already an add-on doing this, and that is very concerning. Another thing that is very concerning for you as a Pinhead player, if you are one, is that now survivors with endurance are completely immune to your possessed chain. This means that they can dead hard your chain, and it also means that if you try to tunnel them when they get hooked for 30 seconds, your power straight up doesn't work on them. This, as we mentioned earlier, allows a survivor to immediately go for the box, and if you try to interrupt them with your chain, you will fail and they will complete the box, which defeats the point of being anti-tunnel. So yeah, Pinhead, I think, gets nerfs that are unreasonable. Next up, one of the ugliest changes. Furtive Chase is a perk that, if you hook the obsession, would give you a haste effect. Now, obviously, having haste on top of the bloodlust haste was a bit redundant, and unfortunately, in the current version of Dead by Daylight, haste stacks together. If you have plus 5% and plus 5%, now you have plus 10% or more, right? So they had to roll this perk back into a previous version. The summary is that when you hook the obsession, your terror radius gets smaller, and if you hook the obsession 5 times, because it keeps switching, right, you will have a 50% smaller terror radius. This perk is garbage. This perk, I'm not even going to call it a new perk because it's simply the old version of Furtive Chase. This perk was awful back then and is awful back now. If you want to have a 50% smaller terror radius, you have to hook the obsession 5 times, and it's so much work for what? why would you want a smaller terror radius? Why don't you simply use a perk like Unforeseen, Tinkerer, the new Beast of Prey, which is really strong because it triggers every time you hook someone now, and you have 40 seconds of undetectable. Why don't you use any of those perks or Plaything, and that would make your terror radius so much harder to detect, and it might also protect you from keys or wiretap or any other thing that could show your aura to the survivor, right? So those things on their own are all immediately better, and most of them work really quickly and don't require you to get 5 hooks. This perk is so bad, and the fact that they had to go back and they could make a new version that's interesting is very, very disappointing. Almost as disappointing is what they've done to medkits. They have not changed the medkits on how they work, even though there are some issues with them. And they haven't changed many of the add-ons on medkits that were useless, that nobody uses, that are completely irrelevant. They've only changed the 2 top medkit add-ons. And the first one is the syringe. This syringe used to heal you passively over time. It was very, very strong. Survivors bought it all the time. I think it was very unfair. So I'm glad that they reworked it. Now it makes it so that if you use it, you remove exhaustion. It is better than before. This is an objectively better version of the add-on. The only concern that I have is that survivors already love exhaustion perks, and there's already so many reasons to run exhaustion perks and visual and this and that and use them multiple times. Now people are making the meme of like using 3 sprint bursts in one chase with a syringe, with blood rush. Yeah, it's possible to do it. I don't think this is stronger than before. Maybe in some situations it could be, maybe, but my point is I don't love the change. I think it's a little bit uninspired, but you know what? It's fine. It's okay. It could be fine. Honestly, all things considered, it's fine. It's acceptable. If I had to make a quick change, I might have made this too. This is all right. What they did to the next add-on, though, that part really just baffles me. So the Styptic used to be able to be used, and then you would tank a hit. It was quite powerful. A lot of risk involved. I see a lot of survivors misuse it, right? But this was okay. What it does now is absolutely pathetic. It makes it so that if you heal yourself with a medkit, you have 15% increased efficiency. This means that by the time you finish one heal, you will now have about 3 extra charges left over. Let's say 4 extra charges left over, right? Let's round it up a little bit. So that means that you can do like a very, very small partial heal or use it on someone else. And this is one of the most pathetic add-ons in the entire game. It gets outclassed by almost every other add-on of same or even lower rarity. And just to put it into perspective, with this add-on, if you heal yourself, you will have, let's say, 3 or 4 extra charges. But if you run that brown add-on, the bandages, that gives you 8 charges. It gives you double. And it gives you double at the start, even if you don't use it for self-heals. It is so insane that someone made this add-on. It is so bad that it really makes me think, who designed this? Did they think for a minute about how this add-on is now worse than even a brown add-on for medkits? So yeah, the Styptic is completely gutted. It's completely useless. I think this would be a bad brown add-on. The only thing it can do is that if you miss one skill check while healing yourself, maybe you still have enough to finish the heal, which you couldn't before. But again, the brown add-on would do that and then some more. So absolutely insane. And one of the most crazy things that you're going to see in this PTB is just how basement is now a good place for survivors to die in. Playing Basement Trapper was one of the ways to make Trapper strong, one of the things that kept him as a bit of a threat sometimes. In this new PTB, because the anti-camping is now 20 meters, and it gets more and more pronounced the longer you're in, if you stick around shack, or if you stick around main building with a basement, the survivor from down there is going to unhook themselves. And not only are they going to unhook themselves, they're going to unhook themselves so unbelievably fast that you cannot really play Basement Trapper at all. And I mean at all. Even if you just linger for a bit, you are going to give it. If you go any further, then survivors obviously are going to disarm the traps and get in, and then it's every man for himself, right? So yeah, the whole basement thing is dead. Funnily enough, if you play Bubba, you can still camp basement. I did one test on stream, and I'll show you the footage of this, and I asked my friend to camp me as Bubba, and that was very effective. That was extremely effective. That, because the basement was a bit taller, that worked like a charm. So it's really good to know that the most annoying things that you can do in basement, they still work. And also, if you unhook yourself and you come out, Bubba can still double tap you. They introduced a new system to prevent this, and it doesn't really work at all. I'm gonna just show you footage of me getting immediately double tapped by a Bubba, and you tell me what good is the anti-camp and the anti-face cam and the anti-tunnel in situations like this. It is so stupid, but not as stupid as a new perk that they've changed. Because they had to change so many perks to accommodate for new effects, they buffed some of the perks that were already very strong. Now Wicked has a similar effect to Resurgence, when if you unhook yourself from the basement, you have a little bit of healed already on. And the crazy thing is that you can stack it with Resurgence and unhook yourself from the basement at full health. Now, we're not going to be dramatic about this. It's probably going to get patched, and this is probably not going to come to life. But the fact that this even exists in the PTB, did no one think about it? Did they forget that there was another perk that already did it? Did they think that unhooking yourself from basement at full HP, even in endgame, is like a good, acceptable thing? All of this really is making me fear for the future of Dead by Daylight, if these are the decisions that we're making in the PTB. Now, mind you, I am completely okay with visual bugs and other small bugs happening in the PTB. I really don't care for those. These bugs are going to be changed for the time the release happens, and it's really not a big deal at all. And I'm also completely fine with a new perk or a new effect or a rework that has a value that can be adjusted and made better. But let's be honest, this is the second time they're doing these changes. They're not going to change the skeleton of this. This is what we're getting. In this PTB, we can give feedback, but this is probably what we're getting. And it's putting Dead by Daylight in a situation where there's so much Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid instead of just trying to fix the wound in the first place. It was a very disappointing experience to see how ill-conceived some of these things were. There are some things we haven't talked about, right? And also some positive things that are worth mentioning. Like, for example, they rework Hawkins to have a bit more easier navigation and better loops. That's awesome. Some things in this PTB, definitely awesome and worth keeping, and good job developers on that. But the overall feeling that I got from this PTB is a certain inability to want to go back and change some core things about the game. Instead, we're just doing little patch fixes, little band-aids here and there to hopefully bring a percentage in a statistic down to a certain number that the developers find acceptable so that they can do what they have to do, which is work on the next killer, work on the next map, work on the next survivor, work on the next everything, right? Because this game, as we know, is going forward so much. Even with this delay that they've done, where the next killer is going to take a bit longer to come out, it really doesn't feel like it's helping them take the necessary steps to make the game healthier. But anyway, we've been talking about this for an hour. I'm signing out. I'm very disappointing, and all of this is really mentally making me check out of this game as we go further and further. This game is just going into a different direction of what I think the game needs, and it's just a sad thing to see.